Well, ladies and gentlemen, another stage of the Pickems and another L held by yours truly, as we managed to only get 4 again. This means I've got 4 in each stage. Another day I could have easily had 5 or 6 on each stage, but that's just the way it goes. Really got wrecked in the first day, if I'm being honest, with Vitality losing to FaZe and the Mongols losing to Imperial. At that point, it was always looking like I was cooked. I went for a couple of gamble picks. It did not pay off. And ultimately, I'm in a position now where I realistically need to absolutely nail this playoff and get all of these correct, I think, in order to get gold. So the gold dream is still alive, but just about, and it's hanging by a thread. So let's go through the playoffs and discuss who we think is going to make it and who's going to win the major. So we're going to go through each game at a time. First off, though, quick recap on how we got to this stage. Because some of these runs are not like the others, and even though some teams have made it through, we do need to discuss how they made it to this stage, because it wasn't particularly convincing. What was convincing was Furia. They, by far, looked, to me, the best team overall over the duration. And realistically, any video you're going to watch, or most videos I would imagine that you're going to watch, are going to say roughly the same thing. And that is, Furia were the favourites coming into this major, and after stage 3, they remain the favourites. Nothing has changed. Because they came in fine form, a ton of wins, no real weaknesses in terms of map pool, no real weaknesses when it comes to playing against other teams. You could maybe argue that Mouse has been a bit of a problem for them. But overall, they've looked like a team that has been in command. And nothing changed in the stage of stage 3. Like, they looked so good. One of the reasons I didn't put them as my 3-0s is I was a bit concerned about them coming in cold and how things would go with Na'Vi. They did back at Thunderpick have a best of 5 that went the full 5 maps, and they traded back and forth. And I said in my previous video, it depends on which map it ends up going down to. They ended up getting Nuke, which I think was a W for Furia. They did a good job in the veto, and then they swept aside Na'Vi very convincingly. It was super one-sided. Then play Imperial, who were only in this position because they beat the Mongols. And by the way, that Mongols win was absurd. Like, Mongols played so bad on Dust 2. I can still remember it clearly. Control-Ez in particular was having a shocker. He really picked up his own individual performance, though, after that point, so full credit to him. But it was a really rough first game, and I honestly thought after that game that the Mongols would go out in like 0-3, 1-3 sort of fashion. It was that poor. But then they picked it up themselves, and they did really run with it with wins against Liquid, FaZe, and then G2. And it was pretty flawless after that point of the first map. It was just a blip. It was a glitch on the radar, and then things went back to normal. But Furia were very impressive, 2-0ing G2. I have to mention with G2, and this does suck for them, once they hit the best of 3s, it felt like they really did come undone. The Mongols game in particular, I think, was a very winnable one for G2. I have to say, Control-Ez coming in for Senzu, he has played individually decent, and the Mongols with 9-10 in particular have still shone pretty brightly. But if G2 do want to make that next step with the team that they have, which I think they absolutely could, Natus and Heavy God in particular, big fans of theirs. I think they're a great rifling duo. Sun Pius is still a little bit out in the jury as far as I'm concerned, but that was a winnable game, and they got beaten by the Mongols pretty comprehensively, and then they ended up losing to Falcons, which I'll get back into in a few moments' time. So, ultimately, Furia, very, very impressed, and I think they remain the favourites. The way that Molodoy's playing is really impressive to me. Yakindar's smashing it. Fallen individually was also performing in this stage, probably above what you'd expect from him at this point as being sort of the veteran IGLing rifler. But they were incredibly good, and I think they remain the favourites. I think, if you ask me right now, who do I think is winning the major? My answer remains Furia. It was my answer at the start of the major, and it will be my answer going into the playoffs until I see something else. The other team that impressed me was Spirits, although I think their run was a little bit less impressive because they did get a teed-up game against Liquid first, and Liquid were horrible. Like, let's just talk about Liquid quick. I'm sure a lot of people have already made their content and tweets and everything else about this Liquid roster. It was a shambles, guys. They went out 0-3. Minus 14 rounds, 38 to 52. It was just really, really poor. And you look at the teams that they lost against as well, like Spirit, fair enough. Mongols, you could say fair enough, although I think that should be a competitive game with the roster that Liquid has. Losing 2-0 to Passion UA, and the nature and how they lost that game. If you watch that game, it was an absolute disaster class from Liquid from start to finish. It was a horrible game to watch. So many mistakes. So many ridiculous clutches that had no right to get clutched. Nyx, for example, just getting a full-on ninja defuse in smoke underneath 2 or 3 players' noses. There were so many moments where it looked like Liquid just mentally exploded, and essentially they were their own worst enemy. And that roster, I do not believe that roster stays together as 5. I know people are saying that it's relatively new. Elish hasn't been in the roster for that long, but I still think that even if that's the case, there are certain levels, there are certain kind of positions that you need to be reaching if you're a team like Liquid. And to go out 0-3 and to lose to Passion UA, a team that they really should be beating, I just don't think it's good enough. So I'd be amazed if we see this 5-man roster stick together. I do feel for Flashy, still finding his way as a coach. It's such a poison chalice, I think, that team, unfortunately. And I'll be curious to see what happens in the inevitable roster mania post the major. But yeah, Liquid were very disappointing. I don't think they're the most disappointing team of the major, I have to say. I think that still goes to Aurora, who crashed out 1-3 early on, of course. But Liquid's probably in the top 3 disappointments. The other team that went 0-3 is Paravision. I have way more patience and understanding for this Paravision team. I think what James did, of course, they came from stage 1 all the way through here to stage 3, and they had a really rough run of it in terms of the teams they played against. Like, starting against Mouse is rough, and then straight into Na'Vi. I did think they had a decent chance at beating 3D Max. They also went 1-0 up in that series. But unfortunately, I think this is just where you see the levels of different experience kind of prevailing on 3D Max as opposed to Paravision. But what James has done with essentially 4 debutant rookies has been nothing short of spectacular. I'm really excited to see where this Paravision team goes from here. It's kind of the complete opposite way that I feel about this Liquid squad. Like, you've gone out 0-3 Paravision, but I think you can hold your heads high. And you really did make a good go of this one. Some players that I hadn't seen that much showing up to the server and doing great work, like AW, for example, and Notta in particular, was very impressed with both of those guys. And I think James individually had a very impactful major, statistically speaking, but also I was happy to see that although the memes are going to remain forever because they always do, like a turd that won't flush, James has adapted his style. He has actually become more versatile. He's evolved. He is a more aggressive player individually now, and a lot of his calling is more aggressive. And maybe that just goes down to the players that he has at his disposal, the idea that he can maybe mold these players a little bit more because they are newer, they are younger. Whichever way you want to spin it, this Paravision team does look like it can be a real interesting one going forward. And I'll be very curious to see how they do go in the lead up to Cologne. And this really is also, as a side point before I move on, one of the success stories of the VRS. A lot of people have their concerns, and understandably so, but Paravision have been grinding their asses off. I can tell you from casting quite a bit of CCT this season, Paravision have been grinding their asses off at like the tier 2, 2.5 bracket to get the VRS points in order to get to this major in the first place. So all around, congratulations to Paravision. Even though you did go 0-3, I think you can hold your heads high here, boys, and I want to see what you guys have in store for us going forward. So, the rest kind of fell into place roughly as I expected. FaZe making it through from stage 1 all the way here was impressive in the end. I will say, though, I wasn't completely blown away by their run. They did very one-sidedly win against 3D Max and Passion UA, but I don't think either of those teams were especially spectacular. Quick shout out to JT one time. I think what he's doing at Passion UA is fantastic individually. As a fragging IGL, he was really on point. And this is in a team as well where oftentimes you just saw players like Halzerk disappear off the edge of a cliff. I can't remember how many times I saw, it was at least 3, how many times I saw on this stage Halzerk start at like 1-8, 1-7 territory and have no impact, and JT was trying his absolute best to individually sort of carry forward players. So well done, JT. I will say though, FaZe for me are still very shaky. But we're now in playoffs, and this is where anything is possible. There's also an interview that Banks did with Carrigan, which I think was really well done, where he talked about the idea of we have nothing to lose. We should have been out at stage 1. I was telling all the boys, like back when they were playing Red Canids, we should have been out. We're living on borrowed time right now, and we're living basically and playing off house money. At this stage, anything additional is just a huge win. And I said, I thought if FaZe made it through at the beginning of the major to the playoffs, that would be a W. So they've kind of reached the point that we said they should, or at least a lot of people thought they should, and now maybe that does just take the pressure off their shoulders. And keep in mind, they're playing Mouse first, and this is Torji in front of a home crowd. So I would say Mouse are the firm favourites in that game, and maybe that's where FaZe are going to be able to prevail. I think it's not going to be as one-sided as some people would assume. But let's discuss first about Spirit and Falcons, as that is the first quarterfinals. I think this is going to be an interesting game because based off how both teams got here, realistically, Spirit should be the favourite. Falcons squeezed their way through after beating Passion UA, Imperial, and then G2, and G2 really did struggle in those best of threes. And it really took Monesi in that series to hit a different level of carry. The shots he was landing, guys, were absolutely absurd. If you saw the game yourself, you know exactly what I'm talking about. On Dust 2, he was shooting while fully blinded, getting kills. He was jump no-scoping, getting kills. He was a real problem on middle multiple times. He was essentially clutching and carrying Falcons kicking and screaming across the finish line. And for all intents and purposes, G2 probably should have won that game. They managed to break the finances multiple times on the CT side for Falcons, and they just weren't able to pick up a head of steam, and that's mainly because Monesi. And Monesi's stage 3 was kind of all over the place, and if we're being honest, his season has been kind of lackluster overall. I think when, obviously, he joined along and reuniting with Nico again from G2, people thought, right, well, this is it. This is the combo. They then bring in Kaisuke. This is it. This is the trio. They cannot lose. And it just hasn't really clicked. And that they've still managed to make it to the playoffs, albeit by the skin of their teeth. Now, to put that in perspective, if we have a quick look at Monesi, there's a lot of green here, right? And so you're looking at this and it looks good. But when you peel back the layers a little bit more, some of the teams that he's struggling against, so for example, Furia down here, a lot of red, right? Red against Pain as well. But more in this stage of the major, this is how he started off, right? So they played against Bait. It ended up going to Bait 13-10 at 0.74. Then Passion UA at 0.84. Passion UA, guys. This is a team that you should be smashing if you're Monesi. Now, fair enough, Falcons beat them 13-5. There's only a certain amount of kills to go around. It is what it is. But also against Mouse, had a bit of a stumble here on Inferno, another map where you expect him to do well. First map of this series, he ends up going on a 1.06 on Ancient and has more deaths than kills as G2 win 13-9. But after that point, he just really comes alive. And especially on Dust 2, by the way. He has 24 kills here. But if you put this into the context of how the game was going, most of these kills came on the CT side at the end of the game, is where he really stepped up. Until that point, yes, he had a great Inferno against G2 with his 13-4 win for sure. But until that point, it had been a pretty lackluster series and stage. Because you look at that 1.76, guys, it's against Imperial that they beat 13-1. Right, I'm not looking too much into that. So he really did save Falcons for all intents and purposes, and I think realistically you've got to give him a nod of approval for that. But my concern, and the thing that I'm really not sure on, is can he perform at that level in the playoffs against Spirit? Because now you're going to be up against Shiro, you're going to be up against Donk. It's not going to be as easy for you, and I was way more impressed with Spirit, I have to say, in the lead up to the playoffs than I was Falcons. And for that reason, I'm going to go with Spirit to take this win. I think they just look better. The eye test looked better. Falcons, realistically, probably shouldn't even be here in the first place. They narrowly squeaked by G2, who looked very rough when the best of 3 series came along. So next match is Vitality and the Mongols. And I've got to say, I think Vitality should be the favourites to take this game, and fairly convincingly so. Now, again, I will run back another point that I raised about FaZe, where it's like, look, the Mongols, most people didn't even have them to make it through the last stage. Senzu dropping out and Controles coming in, especially after that first map performance against Imperial, which was a shambles. I think most people thought, like, okay, the Mongols will probably go out 1-3, 2-3. They have a stand-in, essentially. One of their best players left the team due to, I think it was just kind of like personal problems, and so we wish Senzu all the best, of course. But they shouldn't be making it through the playoffs. And then they have a great run. Liquid, it's not particularly fantastic. FaZe is a good win, and the G2 is also a good win. But I still have my doubts about the Mongols, I've got to be honest with you, even though I think they probably will have the mental buff of no pressure on them. This has historically been a problem for the Mongols. They blitz through the playoffs, they blitz through the first stage or two of a major, or the first stage or two of an event, and then the playoffs is where they would have a choke, right? This is a historical kind of issue that the Mongols have faced. They did get over this a while back, but I think that having no pressure with no Senzu is going to make them way more deadly and way more powerful as a team. And if it was almost anybody apart from Furia and Vitality, I might give them the slight edge to win the game. But they have drawn into Vitality. And although they started pretty rocky against FaZe, after that point, they really did step it up significantly. So I'm going to go with Vitality to take this win. I think Vitality are by no means 100% right now, I've got to say. Flamesy wasn't great in the last stage. I think Rops was also a little bit off in parts, but they're still a real force to be reckoned with. And although you could make an argument for the Mongols, in my opinion, with that kind of like underdog buff, which I think they definitely thrive on, I still think Vitality are just too strong of a team not to back here and to put them through. Listen, I'm not going to waste your time. I think Furia are going to beat Na'Vi. Now, there are a couple caveats to this one, which I've discussed before in the previous stage. You can go back and watch that, where they played at Thunderpick against each other in a best of 5, and they did trade back maps back and forth. They have also played each other, obviously, at this major, where Furia absolutely dismantled them on Nuke. And so I do think that Furia are the best team coming into the major. I still think they look like the best team collectively. I've been very impressed with how Fallen is leading this team, and so I'm going to go with them again. However, I would say Na'Vi are going to be the underdogs once again, and how do rookies like Molodoy perform now they're at a playoff of a major? I know that we've seen this before. I know we've seen him perform very well in playoffs in the past, but this is where they are actually the favourites. It feels like in bygone sort of tier 1 events, when Molodoy's been in playoffs, I mean, I'm going back to sort of like, I think it was Astana, if I'm not mistaken. It was like one of his first playoffs, and everyone was thinking, like, is he going to perform? Is he going to do it? He's probably going to crumble. He's probably going to succumb underneath the pressure, and he just didn't. He just absolutely popped off. They weren't necessarily the favourites in previous tournaments. Now they are. I think everyone is looking for Furia to win this tournament. It's a different thing to be sort of like this dark horse or this outside chance of a win compared to the pressure that you feel when you are absolutely guaranteed to be the favourites. That could be Furia's undoing, but I still think they beat Na'Vi here, and I think they'll move through to the semi-finals. And then Mouse and FaZe. This for me is a really tough one, because I do think that FaZe thrive in these kind of situations. I really do. I think they're a team that has pretty much got the mission accomplished as far as Karrigan is concerned. The early shakes and jitters of nearly going out in the first stage, then bouncing back with a really incredible performance in stage 2. Barely squeaking by in stage 3, but I said coming into this, I think if FaZe hit the quarters, they'd be very happy with that, with Jacob in the team, obviously losing Rain. Brokey's not particularly playing well. We did see flashes of brilliance from Brokey in stage 3, by the way. There were a couple maps where we were starting to see him have some impact. Frozen and Twists continue to be beasts, and on top of that, Jacob was having some really good individual performances as well. I think they're heating up at the right moment. Is that enough to beat Mouse, though, who really should be beating FaZe here? I'm not sure. I'm going back and forth a lot on this in my mind. I think Torji in front of a Hungarian crowd now in the playoffs could be him, but he also could get in his own head. We saw in stage 3 he had a couple of great maps to finish the stage off, but he started incredibly slow. Additionally, Spinks had some shocking maps. I had him in my fantasy league, so I was watching real closely, especially on Train early on in the stage. He was absent. He was not playing particularly well. Him and Torji did come alive towards the end of the stage, though, and so I am going to have a bit more faith in them. But something is telling me that FaZe can get this win. I'm going to go with FaZe to take this W, guys. Something's telling me that the way and how they've managed to get through to this stage, they're playing on house money, and I think that's a dangerous phase. That's where FaZe is at their absolute most deadly, is when they have nothing to lose. No one expects them realistically to beat Mouse. No one expects them realistically to do anything at this point. Like, they've already gone as far as they should. In fact, some people would argue they shouldn't even be here in the first place. And I think that's where FaZe are going to be super, super dangerous and really scary to play against. And Mouse, they still got that choke in them. I know that they've put a lot of that to bed. I know they're nowhere near as bad as they used to be when it came to playoff choking, but I think they still do have an element of that in them. And FaZe are the kind of team that can punish you. FaZe are the kind of team that are going to just grind out a win. It's not going to be pretty, but I could see them getting the W, so I'm going to go with FaZe. Spirit and Vitality. This is a tough one. This is a really tough one. I thought Vitality responded and reacted really well to that first loss, but I've got to say that I think Spirit have a couple of weaknesses that do concern me. So I think you can get away with Tanir and Zwei not being sort of these powerhouse players when you're playing against the likes of your Liquids, even your Phases, and to a lesser degree Mouse, that probably should have won this game, to be honest with you. But I think when you play against Vitality, you're not going to be afforded those luxuries and you're going to get punished. And how often can you rely on Donk to be going out and getting ace after ace after ace, 4K after 4K after 4K, just carrying this team super hard? I think when you're against a team like Vitality, that's where Donk is. He's still going to be a threat. Don't get me wrong. It's not like he's going to disappear and be garbage, but I think he's going to get found out a lot easier. That's where you're looking at Shiro, but more so Zwei or Tania to really step up to the plate, because Chopper's not going to be that guy. He's going to have the odd map now and again where he performs, but that's not his job in the team. His job in the team is to be the IGL, of course. Sometimes be the entry fragger that just sacrifices himself to the CS gods. But you need Tania or you need Zwei. For me, that is the difference maker. If we go into this playoffs, and I'm completely serious with this point, if we go into this playoffs and Zwei or Tania actually have a good playoff, Spirit can win this major. Off the basis of Donk alone, and to a lesser extent Shiro, if they have that third player popping off, then that is going to be too much for most teams to deal with firepower-wise, and I include Vitality in that bracket. They can beat Furia in the finals as well if they do have that kind of pop-off. But my concern, and where I'm going to have to go with, is if I think out of 10 times how often does Zwei or Tania pop off in the playoffs, it's going to be 2 or 3 out of 10. And the rest of the time, that means Vitality wins. So I'm going to go with Vitality to take this. I think map pool-wise as well is pretty decent for Vitality, so I'll go with Vitality. I'm also not going to waste your time on this one, even though I think FaZe could very well have that sort of underdog buff when it comes to Mouse, who are notoriously sometimes a very slow team to start. I've seen enough shakes from Torji and Spinks in particular to make me think that FaZe can win that. I think if Furia play to their level, which I saw in Stage 3 and I've been seeing for the last few months leading up to the major, I just don't see how FaZe can really go toe-to-toe with Furia. I mean, Molodoi is so beyond brokey in the AWPing department. It's insane at this point. And you could say that like K Serato and Yakinda, Yuri are similar to the core of FaZe. If Twists, Frozen are popping off, Jacob has another couple of good maps. I can definitely understand that. But I also think that Fallen individually is playing better than Karrigan is right now. And their leadership, the way they're calling the game, is quite similar at this point. And Molodoi is just light years ahead of brokey. So I just think Furia, map pool, individual-wise, current form-wise, are going to be head and shoulders above Furia or Mouse, to be honest with you. If you think Mouse win this game, completely understand that decision. I still think Furia get the W regardless. And I think Furia will be your major champions, guys. I thought it coming into the major. I was watching eagerly in stage 3 to see, okay, we're going to see some hiccups. Are we going to see some weaknesses, some chinks in the armor of Furia? And it was a resounding no. They looked phenomenal in stage 3. They looked every bit as good as I expected coming into the major. And I'm just going to have to back them and say that they're going to continue this form. And if they do, they're unstoppable. I don't see any team beating them. I think the best team to beat them actually is probably Team Spirit. And that goes back to what I said before about this idea of, you know, Tenero's way having a proper pop-off playoffs alongside Donk and Shiro, because then I think it's very even in terms of firepower. In fact, you could even argue, like, no one's going to go blow for blow with Donk, and Shiro, when he's actually feeling it, is insanely good with the AWP. But I don't see that happening. I think that's like a 2 out of 10, 3 out of 10 sort of like odds. And so Furia for me are going to take the W here, guys, and they are going to be your Budapest major champions. Do you agree or do you disagree? Comment below and let me know your thoughts on this one. Again, educated guesses, and for the most part, I've been completely wrong over this major. The worst I've ever performed in the Pickems. We'll see if we can save our gold coin in this playoff. I feel pretty good about that overall. I think some people may disagree with Mouse and FaZe. Maybe some people will believe in Falcons, but the rest of this I think is going to go roughly as most people would agree with. See you in the next video, guys. I might do a wrap-up, kind of a summary of how the major went. I'm not sure. We'll see how things go, especially if there's any shocks or surprises in the playoffs, which there very well could be. Best of luck, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.